Hi, thanks for joining me again. I thought that this time we could have a look at the Bitcoin futures chart. I do an update on Bitcoin futures most weeks, and I find it really instructional. It's a good chart to look at. The trading's clear. Now, Bitcoin futures have only been trading since December 2017, so almost 3 years, and that's the entire chart. I've marked a level here, or a zone here, which was likely to hold longer term resistance. This was back in December 17 when price had reached its high. The futures market had only just begun trading, and this widespread, although the volume isn't high here, the widespread suggests that the market was determining this to be an important juncture. The volume's very low because this instrument only just began trading in the month prior. So I marked the low of that bar, and I was willing to adjust it if need be. But price had come down with a very wide spread, and spread and volume correlate really closely. So in the real world, that was likely to be a high volume area. And you can see that some support was found off the lows, and price responded higher for 2 weeks. We're on a weekly chart at the moment. Price came down the following week and then broke below that level in the week after. So I marked the low of that, considering that these people were probably trapped up here, holders up there, and that may become resistance in the future. When price comes back to their level, they may well choose to sell out. You can see that price attempted to support for a couple of weeks and then broke down further. So I marked the high of that bar because it correlated well with the low of this previous bar that I'd marked to form a nice little zone of resistance, and I called that long-term resistance. And I was willing to move them if future price movement suggested that wasn't correct. But that was where I marked it originally, and it's remained there ever since. And you can see from this big wide view that price did find difficulties here and here, and has recently just broken through. We'll look at that later. You can see that price then moved back up, tested this resistance and failed, and then it moved down as it would normally. We'll go in a little bit closer. Now, at some point, value would have been seen by the market, and price would have attempted to accumulate, remembering that price reached up as high as 20,000, or almost as high as 20,000. We're looking at 4,000 to 14,000 here. So through this period here, there was an attempt to consolidate and to accumulate. But because it's a brand new contract, and there's many players who are wanting a piece of the action, once the period of consolidation appeared to be getting close to being done, price broke down again. Now, I think this was engineered, personally. In fact, I'm sure it was engineered. The professionals in the market were highly unlikely to allow price to get away before they could flush out some of the people that have been involved in this period of consolidation through here. This was like a nice little buy the offer. And then price traded for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 weeks sideways within the range of this bar. This is like a period of consolidation and accumulation for sure. 14 weeks sideways before price breaks out, and breaks out on nice volume. That's a lovely signal. Now, you would normally expect, after the breakout and the momentum starts to ease, that price would consolidate in a little bull flag like this. But price was too strong. All it could do was go sideways for 4 bars, and 3 out of the 4 bars created a new high each time and a higher low by the looks each time. This was a market that was just poised to move higher. It was strong. And you can see that it eventually moved up. Here's a previous high here as price was breaking down, and there's a nice little gap there, just showing you the intent in the market. But you can see this attempt to challenge the longer term resistance failed. And price came back, went through a period of consolidation, and then did this little shakeouty thing here. Now, the true range of this bar is here. So this bar is actually that long, really. That's a gap. But this is where the interesting level was. And if you look back for where else resistance might be, there's a high volume bar here. I know it all off by heart because I've been updating this chart for so long. Now for me, I mark this bar because this is where price broke down and it trapped all these people in here when price broke down below these levels here. So this was going to be a resistance level, and I marked the high of this bar because once price gets back above that level and sustainably gets above that level, it's likely to have left all of this weakness behind. It'll have clear air to move higher. So I marked that level, and this level here is very similar. This level here is where price broke down, trapping some of these people into a weak position. So I marked this level as well. Now notice what price does. After the shakeout bar, price goes through a period of time where I would call this bullish absorption, where there's higher lows on almost every bar, there's higher highs on almost every bar. Volumes aren't particularly high, but this is the market absorbing supply and holding back before it moves up and challenges. Now you see price comes up to this level that I marked originally, where supply is likely to be holding, where supply is likely to be waiting. It doesn't even challenge that level. It just moves up to it, respects the level, and then moves sideways. Now let's just clear this off a little bit. Now here was that level. Now through here, it was a little difficult to read for a little while, and you weren't sure whether the price was going to come back and test these lows again. But this bar here, I remember when it arrived. That bar there had much higher volume than all the previous bars. Look at the volume down here. It had higher volume than 1, 2, 3, 4, the previous 4 bars. And on that volume, it didn't break through the range of the previous bar. Here's the previous bar, here's the bar we're looking at. If that was all full of supply and it has a poor close, it doesn't look good. But if that bar was all supply, then it would have done this. But it didn't. It traded level. and the next bar on low volume suggested that supply was exhausted. The next bar moved higher on a slight increase of volume, closing in the middle, and then there was a final test of the market and volume was very low. The lowest volume there'd been for weeks and weeks and weeks. Look at the volume. The lowest volume since here. A long time ago. Remember, this is a weekly chart. That's months ago. Price then responded higher and then moved up on what was, and I said it at the time, excessive volume. Way too much volume. In hindsight, this was really a test of this resistance area. There was no real intent at this time, I don't think, to really push through. You can see when price actually started to challenge the level, spreads reduced and volumes were much lower than this initial push higher. This was a test of the market and there was a final shakeout that came in. And you can see what happened. Now we might just switch there and look at this area here on the daily chart, this area. Knowing where price is at the moment, and there's been a challenge, albeit a half-hearted challenge, to this resistance level. You can see prices pulled back. There's been a test of supply here, and then what looks like a period of absorption as price goes through here. This bar here looked a bit suspicious at the time, but from what had happened previously, it was unlikely to be weak and it wasn't on very high volume, so that was an absorption bar. This was the market chomping at the bit to get going, and here price got going. Now notice here, no excessive volume this time. The sellers had been absorbed. There was very little supply in the market and price was able to bust through this resistance at level on only average volume, fractionally below average volume. This last week, this is the current week, had much higher volume, much narrower spread, which suggests that supply is being drawn out, and it might be that price actually comes back and retests the strength of this longer term resistance level and moves something like this, and if it's found to be strong, we'll probably bounce back out of it and go. But it'll depend on what actually happens at this point. If supply continues to be drawn out, there might be a deeper pullback, and if there's very little supply at all, it might be a shallower pullback and price takes off straight away. Anyway, let's just flip to the daily chart. Okay, this was this half-hearted attempt. This was the half-hearted attempt at challenging the longer term resistance. This was the pullback. It's actually like a shakeout over 3 weeks. And if you look, you'd have the lows of this range. You can see here that prices moved down sharply and found a little support off the bottom of the range, and then prices broken down on similar amount of high volume. But this bar here, still on very high volume, closed in the top half of the bar. Notice this bar closed below the previous bar's low, and this bar closed below the previous bar's low. And this bar, although it traded below in shakeout fashion, it's come back and it's closed within the previous bar's low. So there was definitely support on this bar, and then the next bar has high volume. The volume still remains quite high. It traded within the previous bar's range the whole time and hardly, if at all, broke below its low. It did close poorly, but the market sometimes tries to give you a bad gut feel to flush you out. And there was support on the previous bar, this was a bar where you really wanted to wait and see what happened. And what happened was price responded higher on low volume. The fact that it responded higher with a reasonable spread and the low volume suggests that sellers were done. Now, out of there, price moved higher, only on modest volumes. It wasn't really doing much there. If we mark the high of the range and the low of the range, then we get an absorption sideways pattern. This was likely an attempt to absorb supply that remains in this longer term resistance area. During this period of consolidation, this bar here, narrow spread, above average volume, next bar higher, it's nice and positive. It just looks good. Here's another one where you've got a high volume down bar that threatens the market, makes it appear as though price is going to continue lower, but then the next bar remains within its range, similar to this bar here, remains within its range, and the next bar is up in response. So you've got a number of bars all at the same level, here, here, and here, all coming down to challenge the market, threaten that price is going to move lower, and it doesn't really move lower. At some point in here, even if you were in the market and you got shaken out, or you were a bit of a nervous Nelly and you got out, at some point you'd have to consider what's actually going on. You can't miss it. It was just screaming at you. And this little gap out told you that there was intent in the market. The market was champing at the bit to go, it just couldn't wait. And did a final little consolidation here before it actually accelerated higher and through this longer term resistance. And you can see that when price is getting ready to move, it's gapped above that level, put in a little consolidation just below the expected resistance before it accelerated out and pushed through. And it pushed through with increased but not too excessive volume, and spent the next day finding that momentum was still high, then a test of that level, and the test suggested that sellers were still light on the ground. There was a consolidation bar, another push higher on higher volume. This is supply coming in. We'll have to see what happens with that. Then the next bar struggled to make much ground higher, so there was still supply in the market, and this was a test on the Friday. We'll have to see what happens from there, whether price chooses to come back down this way and test either the lows of the range or this longer term range for strength. We'll have to wait and see. But if volume remain low, I would expect price to then accelerate higher again. So this there is a little bit questionable at the moment. Okay, hopefully that was interesting for you. I like this chart. I've liked it for a while. It makes sense. Okay, thank you. See ya.